well, first off, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us this morning for this session, which we specifically tailored around those who work in and around Oxford University. And it's really bad form to start off any presentation with an apology, but I feel I must make some remarks about our new automated email system. So apologies if you were spammed for interest in this event last week. We've got a new system. It went a bit rogue on us. We've learned our lesson, and we won't do it again. So I'm glad you did get the messages though, because we've put together something which we think is really interesting for you today. We've got an interesting panel of people here, a nice mix. By way of introductions, my name is Richard Page. I'm a director here at ANSecurity. I look after the sales and marketing guys here. I'm joined by my colleague James Preston, who of course you all know, either through working with him as a colleague over at Queen's College or on the many projects he's been working on since he joined us here at ANSecurity. We're also joined by Simon Williams from Ruckus, and Simon's going to be showing us some really great insight that you can get from your Ruckus investments through the Ruckus Analytics Suite. And then finally, last but not least, we've got Dave Peters, co-founder of ANSecurity, and he's technical director, and he's going to be showing us some of the remote access options that we've got beyond the VPN. Now, historically, we've run these sessions by customer request, and we've done them in person, usually over at the Malmaison in Oxford. Clearly, we can't do that this year. This time next year, we do hope to be in front of you so we can go and have a nice conversation afterwards. But we appreciate everybody's got webinar fatigue. We've got so much content to cover here. We could do this in 1 or 2 days and still not scratch the surface. So if there's anything that we touch upon today which you're interested in and want more information, just let myself know, reach out to James, reach out to Matt Oldroyd, and we can arrange a separate discussion. But our focus today is providing you with some insight into some really cool stuff which is very specific around the use case of Oxford University. But there is little point in having cool stuff just for the sake of having cool stuff. It absolutely has to serve a business need. And that's briefly where I just want to start today's session on today, because the business of educating students has evolved more in the last 12 months than in any single year in history. You know, if we think about basic evolutionary theory, it tells us that we absolutely need to adapt and change, not just to thrive into the future, but in the real short term, just to make sure that we absolutely survive intact. And there's loads of ways in which we can paint a picture about how the world's changed. I'm not going to insult anybody's intelligence of going through all of that. You know, we're all living through this. We know the world is a different place. But when it comes to security, there are a couple of key observations that I just want to make so you can start to see why we need to go and make sure that we're making the changes that we have to. So observation number one is abundantly clear to all of us. And I don't want to start off all doom and gloom, but I've tried and failed consistently to find any news or editorial which suggests that there has been a decrease in cyber threats since the pandemic started. It's become a way of life. The volume of cybersecurity attacks has increased exponentially month on month on month. Nobody knows by how much, because there's no trusted scientific way of really being able to collate all of the data together. But, you know, clearly you're going to have been living in a cave to not notice that there's been a significant increase in the volume of, you know, news articles and stories about organisations who've been victims of cyber threats. And those are, of course, only the ones we actually get to hear about. Now, I really don't want to go and bore you with reams and reams of statistics, but one thing that I did find that was really, really interesting, that in one single college, and I'm not going to mention any names here, but in one single college in Oxford over the last week, the Palo Alto firewall has blocked 16 high and 71 critical threats just in a single week, and that is a significant increase on the same period pre-pandemic. So, observation number two, is the nature of the threats. That's also changed significantly. And what you can see on screen here is some really basic analysis of the world pre-pandemic. Now, this information has largely come from a series of reports from central government, so we've used sources such as DCMS and various other data sources. But what it shows you is the volume of institutes that have been impacted in the prior 12 months by breaches of varying different types. Now, I do think it's important to stress, because we do want to try and keep this as scientific as possible, but the source data that we've used originally for this, it did have initially a whole bunch of educational institutes. It tries to cover the whole of education. So we've taken from that data source local authority schools, multi-academy trusts, further education colleges, and so this should represent a pretty realistic picture around higher education. So pre-pandemic, there's no real great surprises, I don't think you can see here. Email, online scams, they're the most popular attack type. You kind of expect that, whether that's online impersonation or trying to direct users to some sort of nasty site. But you can also see here that ranked threat order is, number one seems to be unauthorized access from staff, then it seems to be students, then it seems to be outsiders at the bottom of the list. But, all things being equal, if we then go and extrapolate that same analysis out into the world in 2021, it is a very different picture, and it's a bit of a murky picture as well. With the exception of viruses and unauthorized use of students using technology, all of the numbers have increased, and you can kind of justify that student reduction. But it's the scale of the increase that is most concerning to me. Clearly we've got growth in online and email-initiated scams. We kind of expect that. But it's the worrying increase that we've got in the volume of ransomware and other financially motivated crimes. So if you have a look at hacking an online banking account, it's jumped from 14 to 27%. 13% in a year, that's not insignificant. But the one that really jumps off the page is that threat attack from outsiders, and that's jumped by a massive 39%. And when you start to dig into that, it's the nature of those threats which is most concerning for us. And even this week alone, if you look at the news, we've all been wary of information that's come originally from, I think it was MI5 and then through NCSC about the use of professional social networking platforms. And that is actually purely as a single measure to help thwart the increasing activity from nation-state-sponsored threat actors. Clearly, that's a threat type that's really difficult to measure, but we all know that's increasing significantly and for relevant sectors. Which leads me on to the third observation. So the increased importance, or the perceived importance, of university as high-value targets is something which has significantly increased. 10 years ago, we were barely on the radar, but that's no longer the case. If you go all the way back to the very start of the pandemic, there's no coincidence that, a key e-learning platform, Blackboard, that was one of the first to be attacked by a ransomware. And if you just go onto the BBC website, the most simple of news outlets, to be able to search, you can clearly see that it brings back many articles from across the sector. Really quite frightening. We've got Newcastle, Northumbria, Northampton, Leeds, all very newsworthy stories, all from within the last 12 months, all preventable. And you can kind of see why people would think that universities are higher value if you start to think like a threat actor. So think of the information that we all store as leading educational institutes. If that gets into the wrong hands, then there's serious damage that can be done. Universities, and Oxford in particular, have got acres of confidential research, the value you really cannot put a price upon. But even if you're one of those colleges that doesn't have high value intellectual property of commercial value, that is not going to go and stop the threat actor from trying to get access to it. And it's the other things that they will find that they can then go and turn into a commercial benefit that we need to look about. So you've got personal data for staff and students, you've got financial information, and increasingly we have things like credit card information. You add on top the fact that you have significantly more inputs with the intent of IoT, and it is an absolute threat actor's dream. Now, if you look at the UK economy, with the exception of leisure and financial services, higher education is currently positioned as the number 3 sector when it comes to perceived future cybersecurity threats. 12 months ago, we weren't even in the top 15, so it's a dramatic increase that's happened over the last 12 months. So there's no real surprises so far, I don't think. The world is a nastier, scarier place online and when it comes to technology and security. But when we look at our business of providing education, that's also dramatically changed as well, and something we need to consider. And I've loosely coupled this together into 3 different buckets, if you like, and all of these are absolutely intrinsically linked. So number 1 is this end-to-end student life experience. That has changed dramatically, but so has that learning experience for the student and that teaching experience for the educator. And then number 3 is financial management pressures. We're having to deal with financial pressures that we couldn't have even imagined pre-pandemic. And all 3 of these are intrinsically linked, and we need to go and make sure that we deal with the first 2 so it helps to reduce number 3. So I'm just going to very quickly just gloss over the top of each one of those, starting with the student experience. Now, a lot of this really comes down to the fact that when it comes to students, expectations have changed dramatically. You know, students have a significantly louder voice than they've probably had in any time since we started being educators. They've got the power to decide where they attend university, whether they're going to stay, whether they're going to leave, and if they don't like something with regards to their learning experience or their living experience, they are going to go and shout about it. They're going to share that information on social media, voice their concerns, and people are going to listen. You know, if I look at my own personal experiences, 5 years ago, I wouldn't dream of going and booking a hotel without checking it out on TripAdvisor first, even if it was just a standard Premier Inn. I wanted to go and make sure that there was nothing particularly dodgy. Well, that was 5 years ago. Nowadays, if you're looking at being a class of what would be, 2025, you do exactly the same thing, but you've got a lot more at stake because it's a significant investment. You'll go and have a look at Student Crowd or What Uni. There are so many different platforms out there that are helping to inform the students about where they go and invest the next few years of their life. So we've got to go and make sure that we're continually improving that end-to-end experience. We cannot afford at the start of a term to not have an absolutely full student roster. But what's worse is we could not afford to have students that leave prior to the end of the course. The way that we're funding is totally changed because of the reduction of the value of, or the volume of international students. And these students expect this connected home from home experience. Not just when it comes to the living accommodation, but anywhere in and around and across the campus. And if we need to thrive, then we're absolutely going to make sure that we have to go and provide this service for them, and this experience for them. And talking of experiences and when it comes to learning, we've got to be prepared to enable our students to learn from anywhere and our educators to be able to teach from anywhere. Yeah, the last 2 weeks has clearly shown us that there is light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to the easing of lockdown. We can all do things that we couldn't do a couple of weeks ago, but we know how fragile this picture is. It could change potentially at any point in time. And when it comes to this class of 2025 and learning, they are essentially the Netflix generation. And if you translate that Netflix generation into the demands in a learning environment, we're talking about having to provide non-stop access to on-demand, high-quality learning content. We've got to be able to provide the ability for them to jump onto collaborative working sessions in an absolute instant. We've got to provide them with tools. They need capabilities like screencasting, file sharing, application sharing. They're going to have to want that on their own devices. Educators are going to need that on network devices. And we've got to provide the ability for multiple students, often from many different colleges or even universities, to work collaboratively on the same project at the same time without having to be in that same physical space. And if we've not got that requisite infrastructure in place, then we're going to be limited in our ability to deliver that level of learning experience that really helps to ensure that we retain those students for the entire duration of their studies. And clearly all of this needs to be delivered in a climate of increasing financial pressures. We've got you ask any bursar or VC in any university, they're not going to come back and say the cost of increase of delivering a world-class education is going down. The cost of delivering education goes up year on year on year. We've clearly got the cap on tuition fees. Nothing has really changed on that side. But one thing that has changed is the significant impact on our ability to attract and retain those higher value international students. And even the news this week about Indian nationals having to quarantine in hotels because it's now classed as a red country. That has got an impact not just on Indian nationals coming back to learn, but also other nations considering coming to the UK to go and get their university education. So it's stuff that we need to consider. But also non-term revenue. You know, clearly we've got significant revenue streams from bed and breakfast accommodation, non-term time, conferences, all of that sort of stuff, and that has largely been blocked. So that has caused significant holes in the budget. But, you know, as I said at the start, unless we're able to offer students a modern living and learning experience, then these pressures are only going to get bigger and bigger, and we become part of this vicious circle. And that's what we really want to try and spend today doing for you. We want to go and, James is going to show you some really exciting tech, which is, you know, fundamentally aimed at breaking that circle. How can we go and make sure that we're providing you with, you know, cool experiences so you can deliver smart living? And by that, we're talking about delivering this home from home experience right across the campus. Yeah, smart learning. How can we go and deliver new ways of teaching irrespective of location? And then how can we go and make sure that we can protect the reputation of the college, of the university, protect our financial information, protect our financial information of our students, and also make sure that our IP is protected by tying disparate security systems together to improve that organisational security posture. So hopefully that's given you a nice setup of what's going to come. James, if it's all right with you, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over.
Thank you very much, Rich. So I'm going to take you through a couple of scenarios as far as a student arriving at university, arriving at their dorm room for the very first time. And of course, they need connectivity out to the internet to be able to have that truly connected experience. And a lot of students are going to arrive first with their truly intelligent devices. So those that run a full Android or iOS operating system on their phone, or their shiny new M1 powered Mac, or their Windows 10 PC. And of course, it's very easy to get these connected with Eduroam as it stands right now. So a couple of minutes of plugging in the right username and password or using the cat tool will get those devices online. But of course, the expectation of the students is evolving and changing such that they also want to bring in things like their games consoles. And of course, the traditional way of handling these devices and getting them onto the network was via MAC address-based authentication to a network switch port. So those organizations that have developed and invested in that kind of infrastructure, yes, we can get these devices online, and yes, we're good to go here. But of course, as students' expectations grow, they now want to get these IoT devices, the ones which don't understand 802.1x authentication, don't have a wired network switch port on the back, and so need connectivity through some other mechanism. And of course, a lot of these devices are just not going to understand Eduroam and not going to understand 802.1x authentication, and will only operate via pre-shared key. And of course, we want the students to also get the very best out of these devices. A lot of them, such as your smart TVs or your smart speakers, will facilitate media streaming over Wi-Fi, so Apple AirPlay inspired, for instance. So this is the real challenging aspect. These are the devices that we now want to get on board to our Wi-Fi networks and get them connected. Now, of course, those of you who do have Eduroam will be well aware of the process of getting it set up on students' devices. And just a short search around the internet will find videos of kind of 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes long that show you how to get connected, and also the guides that go along with that. So what I'm going to do is challenge myself to try and beat that 1 minute time of getting set up, get a device online with these two different options. Now, the technology which makes this possible is called Ruckus Cloud Path, and it's all about binding identities to a personal VLAN for the students so that they get their own private broadcast domain, and then binding that all together with pre-shared keys, or as Ruckus call it, dynamic pre-shared key, or DPSK. So I've got two different scenarios here, and those of you who have already got CloudPath, this will be the scenario that you're familiar with. So perhaps the student's acceptance letter arrives, congratulations, you're going to the University of Oxford, you're directed to set up your Oxford single sign-on, and then perhaps just a couple of days before they arrive, they're directed to go to the CloudPath onboarding portal, so a website which you can publish out, or equally so an SSID that you can broadcast inside your network, that gives the user a pre-shared key. Now that pre-shared key can then be inserted into any of their devices, be it a smart speaker, their Xbox, or indeed their Mac PC, or their Android phone, or their iOS powered phone as well. Now let's take a short demonstration as how this looks on an iPhone. So we're going to challenge myself to beat under a minute here with a short pause. So I'm going to head to the University onboarding network. I'm going to get a captive portal redirect to the CloudPath environment. I'm going to accept the terms and conditions of use, and then going to say that I'm going to use the ANSecurity single sign-on service. And at this point, I'm going to pause briefly. So we've got a username and password prompt here. And the thing to understand about CloudPath is it integrates with a wide variety of authentication providers. So we've got a couple of colleges which have gone straight into their AD directories via LDAP. You can also plug in via Radius. But of course, the one that people really want is integration with Shibboleth. Now, there's a technology called SAML, which is effectively the underlying parts of Shibboleth. And we've got several colleges now using this Shibboleth SAML authentication to get students through this authentication prompt using their Oxford SSO. So if we press go again, the student's going to enter their username and password, press continue. And at this point, they've got that pre-shared key, which is personal to them and bound to their identity. And it's their identity which is bound to their own private network. So if they then hop through the process of getting their iPhone to see the CloudPath network there, they can paste in that pre-shared key, press the join button, and then they are welcomed straight onto the internet. Now, if we have a closer look at that CloudPath network, we can then see the IP address of 10.128.8.100. And what I'd like you to do is remember that IP address, because it will come up a little bit later in this presentation as well. Now, if I were to press play throughout that entire video, we're just short of a minute. So yes, indeed, faster than those videos that we've already seen. And that's all very awesome. But there are a couple of things that we really need to understand. So of course, first, we require some form of identification, some form of authentication. So we need to bind the user's pre-shared keys to their devices, and we need to bind the user to their own personal VLAN. So we need to handle authentication in some manner. Now, of course, we also need to manage those accounts when the student leaves. So we want to revoke access in a nice seamless manner when that student has gone home for the holidays or is perhaps leaving the university in the whole. And of course, the student also needs to interact with the service to get that pre-shared key. So there's a couple of steps that they need to go through for that onboarding process to get that pre-shared key. Now, Ruckus over the last several years have been heavily developing CloudPath, and over the last couple of weeks, a new update has now brought us an entirely new way of getting these students online, getting that pre-shared key to them. And it's all centered around the room that they're actually going to be staying in. So instead of binding the VLAN, instead of binding the pre-shared key to the identity, we're now going to bind it to the room, and equally so bind the room to the student's identity such that we can track their activity in our firewall's logs. So we've gone from a 4-step process here to a nice simple 2-step one. Student gets an email directed to their personal accommodation portal. That personal accommodation portal can then provide them with a pre-shared key. They can even go and change that pre-shared key or create a guest pre-shared key inside that accommodation portal. And for those institutions that are happy doing this, that email can actually include the DPSK itself. So in my next demonstration video here, I'm going to head to my email client. I've received this email, and you can see there your Wi-Fi passphrase is. I'm going to copy that Wi-Fi passphrase, head into settings, hook up onto my CloudPath network, paste that pre-shared key in, and again, I'm connected. Now, this whole video from start to finish is 22 seconds long. So a really nice, simple user experience to get that user online. And again, we can see that IP address being assigned there to the same device. So let's take a closer look at the email. So the student has been enrolled into their room. As part of that enrollment process, we provide CloudPath with their email. So this email is also generated from CloudPath itself. And you can see their personal Wi-Fi passphrase listed in there. And it's important to note these passphrases can be customized to uppercase, lowercase, digits, anything that you would like, we can go and customize inside the CloudPath portal. Now, if we were to hover over that personal portal link that you can see there, you can see it's actually got a nice little GUID hidden underneath it, and that's the bit which is performing the authentication to get the student into that personal portal. Now, CloudPath and Ruckus are continuing to develop this service, and in time, what we're going to see is greater customization inside this portal as well. So it could perhaps become the one-stop shop for your students' access to meal booking systems, for instance, and other services as well. For the time being, it's all about delivering that pre-shared key to the student, allowing them to change it, perhaps even generate a QR code which can be printed off and put up inside their room, as well as managing that guest Wi-Fi experience for that student too. Now, the other area where Ruckus and CloudPath can really contribute to the college experience is guests and visitors. So your bed and breakfast visitors, for instance, as well. And of course, traditionally, this has been handled via the cloud, but a great many of us I see out there, having issues with bandwidth caps on the cloud, or perhaps not providing an optimal user experience. So let's look at how that might look at with CloudPath instead. And one of the options we've got here is to issue our users with a voucher or single-use code. Perhaps if they're staying as a B&B guest, that's included with their key as they are sent by the lodge up to their room. We can then capture some further information from that user, for example, their first name, last name, and email address to have some form of attribution, and then open up internet access to them. So a brief sequence of screenshots as to how that might look. Again, we've been directed to our captive portal. This option, we're going to go guest shared passphrase, enter that shared passphrase in, provide our CloudPath portal with the first name, last name, and email address, press continue, and a transparent message is sent back to the Smart Zone controller to then say, give this user access for 24 hours, for instance, give this user access for 12 hours, whatever you'd like to set that to. And one of the brilliant aspects of CloudPath is it is truly customizable and flexible in so many brilliant ways. And one of the aspects that I'd like to call out about it is the option for having sponsors as well. So if you've got academics and fellows that might have people staying with them or visiting the university for a period of time, it's also possible to provide them with a portal to easily generate Wi-Fi codes for their visitors, getting them online in a nice, seamless fashion. And CloudPath is brilliantly integrated with other services through RESTful APIs by being able to make those call messages out to other services. And equally so, you can even send syslog messages out from CloudPath as well if you'd like to capture information that CloudPath is gathering in a syslog server as well. So those of you who know me well will know that I really like to push the limits of things, and quite often that will end up using PowerShell cross-platform switching scripting language. And you can really tell that Microsoft is getting serious about PowerShell because it now has a dark mode logo as well. But of course, some of you might prefer to work in a more visual manner. And this is where I'd like to introduce you to an open source piece of software called Node-RED. And we've actually used Node-RED to create a number of integrations with CloudPath over the last couple of weeks and months to deliver features that are not natively available. Now, the one that I'd like to call out here is a nice simple process to auto-generate the students' identities and their rooms inside those halls. So we can see inside CloudPath, we've got none of them created so far. We press the go button, a process is carried out. And if I refresh the page there, I can see that those rooms have been auto-populated with the students' names and their contact information. So by using these APIs, by using these services and tools, we can really make life easier for ourselves. So if, for instance, you've got a management information system or a student management information system that marries up rooms to users, and if we can export that information, for example, into a CSV or another database, we can plug this into this Node-RED workflow to be able to do fun and interesting things with it, like also generate those rooms. So if we have a closer look at the Node-RED flow here, there's various steps going on, and let's break that down into its component parts. The first bit is authenticating ourselves, of course, up to CloudPath. So here we've provided a username, password, API key, and we've been generated a Java web token, a token that will be using for all the further messages up to CloudPath over the next couple of seconds of that workflow. Next up, we need that source data. So I've got a CSV file on the Node-RED server that's running this. We're going to read that file, parse it as a CSV, and then using a very nice visual manner, rework that data into the format that CloudPath is going to be expecting. And we can see in the bottom right-hand corner that format that we're going to push up into CloudPath in just a minute's time. The final step, of course, then is push that data into CloudPath. So we can see the API key there. We can see the IP address of the server or the host name of the server, and the HTTP post method. That post method is all about pushing information into the CloudPath server, creating those new identities for us in an automated process. And we are very familiar, of course, at ANSecurity with PowerShell and other scripting languages, and now breaking into Node-RED as well. And if you do have some custom features that you might like integrated into CloudPath that we can script out, please get in touch with your account manager and we can sort that out for you. So, of course, a number of technologies are required to make this possible. First up is the Ruckus Smart Zone Network Controller, be that the older SZ104s or the shiny new SZ144s. Right now, this technology is rather exclusive to the physical and virtual versions of the Smart Zone controllers. So if you've got Ruckus Cloud or Unleashed, these features are coming soon, but right now we're really focusing on the Ruckus Smart Zone Network controllers. Of course, CloudPath, then the technology which binds this all together, those identities, the VLAN IDs, the pre-shared keys, and the management system for that. Now, of course, you're going to need network switches which are capable of handling the number of VLANs for the number of rooms or the number of students that you might have at your college or department. And what we typically do here to simplify the deployment is actually tunnel the traffic from the SSID back to the Smart Zone controller. So wrapping that traffic up inside what's known as Ruckus GRE, shipping it into the Smart Zone controller, and that way the only switches that we actually need to configure with all these many hundreds or even thousands of VLAN IDs only actually need to be configured between the Smart Zone controller, your core infrastructure, and of course your firewall. The next up is, of course, a DHCP service. And what we've got here is scripts for the Microsoft Windows Server DHCP service. And we've tested that up to several thousand DHCP server scopes on a machine with just one virtual CPU and 4 GB of RAM. So a nice lightweight service that we can run there. Now, it's important to point out that this pre-shared key technology that I've demonstrated here is Ruckus specific. Although CloudPath is indeed interoperable with other wireless vendors for 802.1x, when it comes to pre-shared key in this manner, this is Ruckus specific. Ruckus Wireless Access Point for support for this, you do need to be on a Smart Zone controller. You do need to be running at least AC Wave 1 or higher access points. So that's R500s, R510s, R550s, for instance, or their equivalent higher models. And finally, we need a firewall which is not only going to support the number of virtual interfaces for all these VLANs that we're creating, but also the DHCP helpers. And there we've certified the PA850 firewalls, which are very prominent throughout the colleges, up to 500 VLAN IDs. And we're actually looking to expand that in future software releases and some other technologies that we're investigating right now. We do also have scripts for creating all these virtual interfaces, again, for Palo Alto firewalls, for FortiGate firewalls, and most recently, SonicWall firewalls as well. So this is all great. Our students are on board. They've got connectivity out to the internet, but of course the internet is a bit of a rogue place. And what I'd like to introduce you to here is 4 different services applications that might be running over your connections that we might want to manage in some manner. So the first one, of course, is BitTorrent. And I think many people have accepted that we need to block, limit, or at least manage access to BitTorrent over networks these days. And any modern application-aware firewall will be able to do that by a simple block rule. Now, the next one might be a little bit of a surprise, but it's definitely very topical at the moment, is Bitcoin mining. So we've actually supported 2 colleges over the last couple of months in blocking access to Bitcoin mining sites, because we've seen students effectively getting free electricity within their university halls to perform Bitcoin mining. Of course, a bit of an abusive use of the service there. So I really would recommend, if you've got an application-aware firewall, start investigating the use of Bitcoin mining over your networks, and discovering, should we actually be blocking this, of course, as well. Now, next up, again, one that might not be forefront of your minds, but is the Tor network environment as well. So, of course, there are plenty of legitimate uses for Tor, particularly in countries which might be oppressive of their media, or not particularly supportive of free speech. But what we're starting to see Tor being used by now is some forms of kind of information stealing malware, which is actually getting out information, encapsulating up inside the Tor network and shipping it up to the dark web. Now, so far, we've seen these 5s and 4s, 5 being a critical level risk application, 4 being a high level risk application. So the 4th one, again, might be a little bit of a surprise. Level 3 is DNS. So you might be thinking, James, surely we can't block access to DNS. That would break everything. But what we're starting to again see, just as with Tor as an emerging space, that DNS is being used as a command and control mechanism. So a machine gets infected by malware in some fashion. That malware then makes DNS calls to both send and receive commands. And of course, although at a very slow pace, you can even use DNS now as a method of exfiltrating data out of a network. So stealing potentially sensitive information, might that be the students' personal records on their machines themselves, or indeed formulas or chemical natures of the coronavirus vaccines and the likes, of course. So you might be thinking, James, seriously, DNS? Well, what I'd like to do there is invite you to head over to GitHub and search for a tool called DNSCat2. And this is, again, a nice piece of open source software which allows you to perform this DNS exfiltration, allows you to take remote control of a machine using DNS as a transport mechanism and steal files off it. And we even use this as part of our war games. So inside ANSecurity every year, we run a series of war games to test the tools and technologies that we have to ensure that they are indeed going to provide the protections that we're stating. And what you can see here in this PowerShell prompt, and also in a piece of software called ADHD, is a remote tunnel being connected to a machine and then stealing a virtual hard disk off that machine. Now, those virtual hard disk files, of course, are going to be rather large, and it does take some time to use this DNS exfiltration mechanism, but there's no reason why the threat actors would want to stop there. They could effectively steal any file off the computers through these mechanisms. So again, James, seriously, is this going to be detected? Is this going to be blocked? And what I've got here is a single line from one of our firewalls that was being used as part of the war games. We always start in a very open, permissive manner. And what you can see here on the left is this DNSCat2 tool being detected and then alerted to state, hey, this is malicious traffic. And of course, we would want to set that alert to a block as well to ensure that this can't be used as a mechanism to steal data off our students' machines, or indeed any machine connected to the college environment. So the final bit is URL filtering. And again, URL filtering has always been a little bit of a touchy subject, particularly inside the university, around you getting freedom of speech, freedom of access to the internet. But what we're really starting to see is 3 main different types of the internet develop. The first being the totally benign, non-malicious, perfectly legitimate internet that we all know and love, which of course we should have free and open access to. The next type of the internet is effectively the ones that if we were secondary education or further education, we might want to restrict access to certain content for the protection of young individuals, which if we were to then go and of course block inside a higher education environment, we might get a lot of people knocking at the doors saying, hey, what's going on? But the final bucket of the internet, the final third option of the internet, is the truly malicious internet. And again, we're seeing it being used more and more for command and control services that are, we really should be blocking access to, making sure that students' machines don't get compromised, students don't leave those negative reviews because they connected up to your Wi-Fi and then found that their machine was compromised because of their dubious browsing habits, perhaps. Cryptocurrency mining, I've already alluded to as well. Students getting effectively free internet, bring along their shiny new RTX 3090s, which they've paid for with their student loans, and start mining to get some extra capital on that. Of course, this is a service that we really need to start investigating inside your environments and making sure we're blocking access to prevent misuse of the electricity which you're providing to your students. Hacking and malware, I hope these are kind of relatively self-explanatory as to why we'd want to block these. Newly registered domains being, again, another emerging space where we're starting to see threat actors spin up a website, spin up a domain for just a couple of hours, perhaps days at the most, use it for malicious purposes, use it as a command and control service, and then shut it down. So what we're really recommending here is domains which have been started over the last 30 days and have never been seen before, cut access to them to prevent this kind of malicious abuse of the internet. And of course, whilst multi-factor authentication is really helping stop phishing or stop the effects of phishing, it's still a very good idea to block access to known phishing sites to prevent students' credentials being compromised. Now, the important point to make here is that any next generation firewall that's worth its weight can perform these domain-based URL filtering categories and these blocks without having to do decryption and inspection of traffic as well. So if you are interested in preventing this kind of traffic from traversing your networks and students' machines being compromised through these different sites, or perhaps even them just taking advantage of your free electricity, get in touch and we can look at the options for you. So the final bit that I'd like to call out about this whole scenario is attributing, of course, students' traffic to their actual identities. So that IP address that we saw earlier, 10.128.8.100, CloudPath can actually, through the XML API inside a Palo firewall, match up IP addresses with identities. So from our second scenario here, we've got ANSecurity Halls and Jean-Luc Picard. That information has been shipped from CloudPath up into our firewall to match the user to their traffic. And within Palo firewalls, and indeed others, there are always a wide variety of options for mapping users to their IP addresses, mapping users to their traffics. For example, reading the event logs out of Active Directory domain controllers. If you've got another NAC service, it's very likely that syslog messages out of that can be integrated into a Palo firewall for parsing and attribution of IP addresses to identities. Or indeed, as we've seen here with CloudPath, going straight into the API on the firewall. So let's say we've received a cease and desist letter. Right now, we don't know who did the malicious deed. Typically, of course, those cease and desist letters are going to comprise of a public IP address, here a private one from inside our lab, a source port, and of course, a time index as well. Now we can take that information and head over to our next generation firewall, head to the monitor tab that we see there and URL filtering logs. And what I've created here is a nice little query based upon that information, which will identify which user was reaching out to the malicious website. So I'm going to paste that in, scroll over to the right-hand side, and what we'll see in the source user tab is that's been attributed to ANSecurity Hall's Jean-Luc Picard. So whichever websites he's been visiting there, prepared to receive £100 cease and desist fine from the college. So what I'm going to ask is, have we solved this problem? Have we delivered the home from home experience and secure connectivity to our students from the broad range of devices? Now, of course, our Macs, our PCs, our Android and our iOS phones, yes. What we've actually started to see is iOS 11 making it a little bit more challenging to use 802.1x networks, particularly if the certificate chain isn't fully trusted. So by putting the pre-shared key into those devices, we can very quickly get them on board. Of course, our games consoles, yes, welcome to the internet as well. One of the nice features of this new room-based deployment mechanism of CloudPath is because we know the VLAN ID that the student is going to be in for their room, we can actually go and untag the switch ports in that room and completely bypass the requirement for MAC address-based authentication because the student is being put in their own private network. And of course, these new devices which do media streaming, don't have wired switch ports, don't understand 802.1x, we can welcome them onto the networks as well for that true home from home experience, enabling those great reviews which are going to come out of the students for their Wi-Fi experience at your college or department. So switching gears a little bit now, we've had a lot of questions over the last year or so for an update on Wi-Fi 6 features and the new hardware that's coming from Ruckus. So I'm going to briefly touch on each of those areas. First, this is a true 30,000-foot view of Wi-Fi 6 features. I've seen presentations that exceed several hours discussing each of these features in detail. Please feel free to search those out, of course. But a 30,000-foot view, OFDMA is possibly the single most useful new feature that's come out in Wi-Fi 6. Now, if you imagine Wi-Fi 5 and earlier all being about a single client talking to a single wireless access point, kind of like a single lane being open on the motorway, we're not taking best use of the bandwidth that's available to us. Wi-Fi 6 is all about opening up those extra lanes on the motorway and allowing a single source, the access point, to talk to multiple clients at the same time using the same chunk of bandwidth. And this is really useful in small packet environments. So if we've got small amounts of traffic going to a wide number of clients, instead of just talking to one client at one time and asking the others to wait, OFDMA opens up to multiple clients being able to talk to the same AP at the same time. Now, multi-muse and MIMO, you might be very familiar with from Wi-Fi 4, and of course, ever so slightly enhanced in Wi-Fi 6, but traditionally it's all been about the download side. So from the access point to the client receiving data from the access point, and that's been the only direction that multi-use and MIMO has worked in. In Wi-Fi 6, it's now working on the upload side as well. So from the client to the wireless access point, we can use multiple radios, multiple streams at the same time to get more information out of that client to our access point and onto the network. Of course, this is quite handy in bandwidth intensive tasks. So the rise of video conferencing and students using 1080p and higher resolution webcams, this can be really quite handy to ensure that we've got the bandwidth there for the very best possible video experience. Now, there have been massive power efficiency gains in Wi-Fi 6 on the client side through a feature known as target wait time. And here, the wireless access point will actually instruct the client to sleep its radio for tenths or hundredths of a second at a time, which over a prolonged period of time can really improve battery life. And I've seen some studies which have actually shown that by using this target wait time feature, some mobile phones can have nearly an hour's extra battery worth whilst they're watching videos, whilst they're browsing the internet, just through the use of this target wait time feature. Wi-Fi 5 brought about 256 QAM. Wi-Fi 6 brings along 1024 QAM. This is really a 30,000-foot view about bringing greater bit rates to our clients. The next one might be a little bit of a surprise. James, every Wi-Fi survey you've come to us and done recently, you've been banging the drum about 5 gigahertz coverage and really downplaying 2.4 gigahertz coverage. Well, Wi-Fi 6 refocuses us a little bit on 2.4 gigahertz coverage. There were no actual serious improvements to 2.4 gigahertz usage in Wi-Fi 5. Effectively, all of your clients would have still been using older N-class or Wi-Fi 4 communication technologies, whereas Wi-Fi 6 has brought all of these improvements to 2.4 gigahertz band as well. Now, of course, it's going to take some time for sufficient proliferation of Wi-Fi 6 devices to come out there for this to be a useful feature. But certainly, we can make better use of the bandwidth available to us with Wi-Fi 6 support for 2.4 gigahertz. And the final feature, called BSS coloring, is all about getting the very best out of the bandwidth, again, in high density, high channel overlap environments. So previously, access points had no method of positively identifying themselves to clients. So listen to me, don't listen to the access points which are operating on overlapping channels. BSS coloring introduces that feature to allow a client to listen to a very specific access point, listen to its radio transmissions exclusively, and discard and disregard that coming from other access points that might be close by, helping in these high density, high overlap channel environments. Now, when it comes to hardware, the indoor APs from Ruckus, from the R550 up to the R750, have all had a major refresh for the Wi-Fi 6 technologies. And what I'd really like to point out here is they truly are at the stage now where PoE plus power delivery is required. So if you've still got switches out there with just PoE delivery, now's the time to consider getting them to at least PoE plus, if not higher standards of power delivery. When it comes to the wall plate AP, so we've got coming online very soon the H550. This H550 wireless access point designed for replacing the wall faceplate in your rooms. 4 network switch ports on the underside, one of which is PoE output as well. So if you've got a desk phone, for instance, you can plug that into these access points to power that desk phone. When it comes to the outdoor access points, for quite a time, we've had just the T750 as the Wi-Fi 6 access point, but Ruckus have now launched the T350 model as well. And this is the model that we would typically see being deployed into, gardens and, the Fellows Gardens, for instance, around colleges, whilst the T750 is really designed for, large auditoriums in outdoor spaces, the Kassam Stadium, for instance, as well. Now, the Smart Zone controller has had a major refresh as well. So the SZ104 has now got its end of life stated. Of course, still many years of support to come with that. But with the new SZ144 controller, we've got 4 10 gigabit SFP plus ports on the front there. So Ruckus is all about moving towards support for these high bandwidth, high throughput environments, and especially if we're doing tunneling back to the controller, those SFP plus ports can be very handy for that. As I mentioned earlier, these controllers do have a built-in data plane. This allows us to do that tunneling of traffic from an access point over your network switch environment without having to tag all those VLANs on every switch port back to the controller to really simplify the deployment, especially of these per user VLANs or per room VLAN technologies. A key point to make as well about the controller is, for the longest time, we always called it the wireless LAN controller, but Ruckus have switched gears quite a lot here with describing it now of a network controller instead of just a wireless LAN controller. And that's because these are now about managing not just Ruckus wireless access points, but also Ruckus network switches as well. Now that leads us very nicely into the switch models, which are now out there as well. So the 7150 has had a series of upgrades and improvements to it, in particular the ZP series, which we'll look at in a minute. And the relatively newly introduced 7550 series, we're seeing as a brilliant option for aggregation and core layers inside college campuses. And we'll have a look at the features of that one in just a minute as well. When it comes to the ZP series, this is all about delivering 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports and up to 90 watts of power delivery through PoE as well. So 48 port model switch that we've got there on the left-hand side has got 16 ports for 2.5 gigabit and 90 watt power delivery. There's also a smaller 10 port switch there that you can see on the right-hand side, which also has these 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports and 90 watts of power delivery. That 48 port switch, now because of the density of that power through it, it's also got a total PoE budget of nearly 1.5 kilowatts through that. And the important point to note about all the Ruckus switches is that you can stack, in many cases, up to 12 switches using 10 gigabit DACs, using 40 gigabit DACs, for instance, across the same family of switches. So for instance, taking one of these small 10 port switches and stacking them with the 48 ports as well. When it comes to the kind of more entry-level switches in the 7150 series lineup, we've also got a fanless PoE mode as well. So if you've got a switch cabinet that might be inside a rather sensitive area, perhaps inside an academic's room where we don't want to generate too much noise, these switches can still operate with PoE plus output up to 150 watts of power delivery. So much less than their maximum outputs, of course, but it can still be used in both the 24 and 48 volt models to give you some method of power delivery. Now, when it comes to the 7550 series switches, Ruckus have introduced a really interesting model here with quite a unique density of ports in the 48F model, which gives us 12 10 gigabit SFP plus ports and 36 1 gigabit SFP ports. Now, the nice thing about this model is we're seeing a number of colleges, a number of departments start to expand into 10 gigabit connectivity between their switches for future growth, for instance. But of course, there are going to be a number of access switches out there that are just never going to need that bandwidth. And this is where this switch strikes that really nice balance of enough 10 gigabit Ethernet ports there to provide the connectivities that you require to the high density areas, whilst those more quieter areas might just need only 1 gigabit uplinks to them as well. There's also a 24F model in this lineup, which brings 24 ports of 10 gigabit SFP plus as well. And because these are designed to be deployed as your aggregation in your core layers, these switches also have redundant power supply options too. So that's all from me for now. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Simon Williams from Ruckus Networks, who's going to introduce us to Ruckus Analytics, a really interesting analytical platform from Ruckus to keep tabs on your network. Simon.
Hey, good morning, folks. Let's see, can you see my screen, James? That's the first challenge.
Yep, you're good to go there, Simon.
Oh, cool. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, James. We're just going to give you 10 minutes on Ruckus Analytics and what this can do for you. So we're going to do this completely with demo rather than slides. So Ruckus Analytics is actually a value add to Smart Zone and cloud environments to be able to stream all that great data, the day-to-day data that Smart Zone's picking up, and feed it into a system that's going to do some artificial intelligence and some machine learning magic and create a different view of the data that you've got. Data's kept in Ruckus Analytics for a year, and I'm just going to whiz you through the screens and tell you what some customers are telling us about it when they've used it. So as you can see here, we've got a top screen. Looks very similar to Smart Zone and some of the other Ruckus views that you've seen. We've got various different contents that we can look at. We're looking at the top level here, which is the dashboard, which I'll just briefly take you through. First of all, you might notice the display is very different. This is a circle packing diagram that is showing you various different Smart Zone clusters. And within the clusters, you've then got, depending on your Smart Zone type, you've then got domains. And within the domains, you've then got zones that will keep that you can drill down into. So effectively, you can go into a particular Smart Zone cluster, focus on a particular domain, and then in the domain, you'll then find the zone, and you then find individual access points. So you can drill down very easily. You can also move between these different menus very quickly with various different clickable options from the dashboard here. The other thing that's happening is Ruckus Analytics is qualifying and categorizing all the incidents that are happening into your typical help desk P1, P2, P3, P4 levels of criticality. With interfaces, currently we do interfaces using webhooks into the likes of ServiceNow and Salesforce.com, and that will only increase into other systems so that we can feed into those help desk customer relationship management systems. The other thing is Ruckus Analytics, because it's doing some machine learning, it's not just directly mapping an incident to a particular priority. For example, you do have the capability, for example, to monitor, for example, the memory allocation for switches, for example, and Ruckus Analytics could spot an area where the memory is increasing, the memory utilization is increasing on a switch, and determine how long it's going to be before that gets critical. So initially, it could be categorized as a P3, as an example. But if we're seeing that incident is going to happen in an hour rather than a few days, then we can categorize that as a P1. So there's some learning in there in terms of how it actually categorizes the incidents. Incident types are generally put into three categories: so connections, performance, and infrastructure. And also the other thing to note on this page is you can actually set your date range in terms of looking back over that year's worth of data and what's been happening in those particular locations. If I look at these various different incidents that are happening, we've got some various different things happening. I'm going to just dive straight into these. So if I click on this particular incident that's saying VLAN mismatch, what I'm going to see here is one of the newer features of Ruckus Analytics is that it'll do a few different things for the switches as we increase the features for ICXs on the analytics system. And one of those is going around looking for VLAN mismatches. So this is quite simply, it's found a couple of switches with a link between them where the VLAN don't match on either end. You've got a switch here which is configured for where the port is configured for VLAN 1 and VLAN 200. At the other end, it's configured for VLAN 100. Complete mismatch of VLAN, so there's nothing happening on that particular link. So that's been flagged up as a P3 switch. It's giving you some actions to do, root cause and recommended action of what to do about that. And it also gives you a bit more incident information. So quite specific on what it can actually do. And you can see it's actually taken us into the analytics area here in terms of the troubleshooting. If I go back to the dashboard, I'll just pick on another incident that we have in this area, and it's an incident of coverage. Let's go for performance coverage. Okay, if we look at that, what we've actually got is an incident that's come in that's saying clients with low received signal strength are unusually high in this particular zone. So it's identified that we've got clients. Now, the first thing, well, maybe one of the first things you want to know from a support point of view is how many clients are affected. So we can see down here, is it one or two? Is it hundreds? So we can see there's 20 out of 31 clients in that zone that are actually affected, and we'll drill down to those in a moment. It's actually showing you some of the appropriate information for the event. So it's showing you the received signal strength quality by client. And you can see there that, as we go through, we've actually had quite a high level of, more than 50% of the customers are getting a bad received signal strength compared to others at various different times. And it gives you a distribution of that in terms of samples. It starts to tell you information about the wireless LAN that's happening on, the operating system of the phones in case it's specific to a particular operating system for the clients, I should say. And it's actually happening on an R550 model. So that might head us towards some sort of diagnostic capability. It's giving you some root cause. Maybe there's insufficient APs, a coverage issue. Maybe you've got a roaming issue in terms of sticky clients attaching to an AP and not roaming correctly, and it's giving you various recommended actions. But if we go to the view details part there, we can actually see all the devices that are affected by this particular issue, and we can then go and look at individual client details or client troubleshooting. So the great bit of this, as I see it, is your help desk is on the phone to a particular client, and we want to focus the effort on that particular client. So Elsa's iPhone, in this particular case, we can actually look at the average time of good, average, and poor connection. You can see you've got a 72% poor connection there. And what we can do is individually go through the connection events and see what's going on. We're getting some association failures there. Authentication failures. You can also see the connection quality as we go through. So you can start to knock it down to specific time that we're having particular issues there for that particular client. And of course, just like you're used to with Smart Zone, you've got Elasticsearch at the top here to search for particular phones or clients based on what the user is describing as they call into the help desk. So very useful feature, and you can see that connectivity going back and quite a period of time to show you what's going on. So very colorful and lots of information there that we can get in real time to see what's happening. A new feature we've got here is service validation. So You might have the situation where you might be putting probes out into the network to probe and see how your network is running. It happens definitely in the student accommodation providers environment, where they have specific probes put into the location to do various different tests. Now what we've got is a capability on our access points now of where they actually have a virtual user endpoint built into the access point, such that we can create tests from one or hundreds of access points at the same time to be able to probe back into the network. Now, currently that doesn't include the radio aspect specifically, but does include the various different aspects. So we configure the test to have a test based on a particular wireless LAN, particular band, particular association method. So it might be a pre-shared key, might be radius, might be client portal. We can then select DNS servers, ping, and trace route destinations, and do a speed test. And we can see there, overall, all those tests are passing very well in terms of the lovely green display there. If we look at the details there, we can start to look at the tests over multiple access points. So this particular test was done across 2 access points. You can see that the various different sections of the test passed, and we can see what the various different results are. If I go back, we can see, let's pick a bad one. If we pick a bad one here, we can see this particular one is showing an amount of errors in that particular test, and we can again go to more details, and we can see that's a test failure on one specific access point. So there's an issue there that we need to resolve of some sort. So that's service validation. That's only going to increase in terms of how we set up connectivity, for example, for Zoom and Teams. Obviously, a moment in time when a lot of that is happening, and you want to know the quality of experience of users on those type of systems. So in the future on Ruckus Analytics, you'll see those kind of statistics as well. So the last part I'll just talk about is reports and Data Explorer. So some of the things customers are telling us is, first of all, when they run up Ruckus Analytics, first of all, it's finding problems that they didn't know they had, especially the VLAN mismatches and things like that. So that's a great a plus point. Secondly, it's also allowing them to do things much more efficiently. So, for example, for hospitality customers, they've found that they've had to make changes sitting at their desk on SmartZone and then roam the corridors with devices trying to see how the service is improved. What they've found is they can actually make changes and see how those improvements have happened on Ruckus Analytics without leaving their desks. So much more efficient in terms of using the data and seeing what's going on when you make a change. The other thing that they're using it for is reporting. So obviously you have to justify expenditure in various different parts of the network based on reports, maybe to an exec level or technical manager level. And the reporting, we've got a whole load of pre-canned reports here that give you that sort of level of data. So just general, at the high level, how many access points, how many smart zones, how many switches. One of the diagrams I love here, just because you can play around with these various things, but what are the most type of clients that you're getting on the system, and how much data are they sending? So no surprises, you've got iPhones, you've got Android devices, you've got Windows devices. We can turn off these various things and just see what's happening on individual client operating systems, so you can see which ones are sending the most traffic. You've generally got Netflix devices here, kind of on various times, but you can turn these on and make them happen in various different kind of slicing and dicing of the various different data. And you can see very, very pretty displays of top access points, top wireless LANs, and even some worded descriptions of, did you know the busiest wireless LAN was this, accounting for 24% of the traffic. Average session time last week was 2 hours, 4 minutes, and so on and so forth. And we can drill down to various different reports off the shelf for APs, for clients, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's useful if you don't want to get into too much depth or customization. However, you've got all that data that's being held in the analytics system in the cloud. And what that allows us to do is create various different dashboards. I'm just going to the home creation here. What we have is a whole load of data cubes in terms of categorizing the data that's being held, whether it's about Wi-Fi calling, the switches network, individual clients, and so on and so forth. You can click on those and you can then manipulate in a kind of slice and dice 3 or multi-dimensional reports to create your own reports or dashboards. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. So here we've got someone has made a particular dashboard called Laurent's dashboard. And what Laurent has done here is actually created a report that shows us as a dashboard. This could be what you have on the screen on the IT department's wall, that's telling you how things are running in terms of, in this case, the 5 and the 2.4 gig areas. What kind of throughput they're getting. So this is a report of the moment. If I invest in Wi-Fi 6, how are my Wi-Fi 6 clients running? And you can see a clear difference there in terms of average throughput between Wi-Fi 6 clients and Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 4 clients if running in the network. So really good thing to maybe watch and justify a value to a deployment. I'm just going to quickly flip over to another system, just in the view of time. And this also reminded me to say that that the one we were looking at there was EU based in terms of its hosting within the Google Compute platform. We've got US, EU, and Asia Pacific versions, so suiting GDPR and those kind of issues. So this is our US version. This just had an interesting report on here. So same Explorer here, but I can look at this particular report, which is guest experience. So for student accommodation and hospitality, what you might want to see is the average received signal strength and signal to noise ratio within different areas of the location. So we've got by the lounge, by the pool, in various different wireless LAN environments. You can see how each of those locations is performing. So you can see, at the bottom here, particular zones are getting a very good received signal strength and average signal noise ratio, which is giving them a great throughput. There's obviously a bit of work needed by the lounge and by the pool, where we've got quite a high received signal strength and signal to noise ratio is quite low. That's having an effect on throughput. And they've also built into this the particular dashboard, looking at QoE by radio type and also by client type as well. So you can start to look at things and how things are actually performing per event. Just finishing off, actually getting smart zone and cloud associated into Ruckus Analytics. It literally is a license per device, per AP or per switch. You can get trials of this via ANS to give this a quick go. So a nice and easy way of doing it. You can enable this per AP and per switch. So if you want to try a small zone or a small area to start looking at the analytics in that area, you don't have to buy licenses for the whole network, but you can have a look and see how it performs in that area. For cloud, it's actually built in, so it's a nice easy upgrade to get. For Smart Zone, it's simply selecting your region for Ruckus Analytics and a username and password, and the API will connect to your analytics account, and away you go. So really simple setup, nice, easy solution. So I think it's back to you, James, just to, if you want to mention anything about that or add any bits I've maybe forgotten, but hopefully you can see the key thing we're getting from customers is this is a little bit like adding an extra person on the help desk in terms of time to fix issues is much shorter than it used to be in terms of Ruckus Analytics focusing in on specific issues and how to go and fix them. So back to you, James.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think one of the things that really rings clear for me about Ruckus Analytics is how easy it is to just get your Smart Zone controller plugged into it. Point some credentials into the controller, point it at which region you want to plug that data into, and you're away. Thank you very much, Simon.
No problem. Thank you.
If I can just steal the screen sharing off you as well. Yeah, thank you. So final bit from me for the morning. So the Wi-Fi 6 access points, which you're now deploying, be they R550, 650s or 750s, don't just stop at Wi-Fi now. So what Ruckus have been building into the full range of their models are IoT-enabled radios. So devices which are typically very low power, operate over longer ranges, and have batteries powering them. And what Ruckus have built into these models are Zigbee and Bluetooth low energy radios. Now, if you've already got something like Philips Hue or IKEA Tradfree at home, you're probably already familiar with Zigbee. And Ruckus is all about taking these technologies and building them into the business, which previously might have been very inaccessible, previously might have been very proprietary. Whereas now, through these common protocols, through these common mechanisms of interacting with these devices, they can be opened up and standards based. Now, Bluetooth Low Energy is another emerging area, and here it's very useful in the notion of tracking a device's location. So if you've got perhaps some high-value equipment in the department, or some particular machinery that is portable but needs to be tracked around the building, there are Bluetooth Low Energy tags which you can attach to these, and the access points can, through various pieces of software, perform triangulation to identify where these devices are. Now, you might be thinking, James, surely this IoT thing will never catch on. But in reality, over the last couple of months, I've been to 2 colleges now which have adopted IoT technologies without even realizing it. In one case, they were actually deploying shiny new Acer Abloy door locks, and alongside the Ruckus wireless access points were actually the Acer Abloy access points as well, which were running over Zigbee. And would you believe it, Ruckus has also got native integrations to a lot of these technologies now, Acer Abloy and Salto included. So instead of having to deploy additional hardware, instead of having to manage that additional hardware and run network cables to it to have these online door locks, this can now be accomplished through the Ruckus wireless access points that you've already got, have already made investments in. And through a simple piece of software called the Ruckus IoT Suite, we can enable access into those radios and start to get useful extra value from them. The second instance that I saw were mains-powered temperature and humidity environment sensors that were running over the Wi-Fi network. And what a lot of people might not be aware of is, again, these sensors are now very inexpensive, 10 to 15 pounds that can be bought off Amazon. But instead of powered by Wi-Fi, instead of requiring a mains connection, can actually be battery operated with a battery that will last legitimately in excess of a year. And again, communicate over these low energy technologies like Bluetooth or like Zigbee. And the example on the right-hand side I've got there, I'm actually using these throughout the home where I am on a Ruckus wireless access point. And these are legitimately available from Amazon for about £12 a go. So where I really see this kind of technology building into is in the libraries, in the areas where you've got these, again, high value items that you need to control the temperature and humidity through. And you've already got this technology built inside the access points. It is just now a case of exploiting that for your own gain, of course. And now these IoT technologies have a wide range of applications, a wide range of areas. For example, in controlling electronic switches, controlling fans, controlling power to devices. Those door locks that we've already seen, detecting if a door is open, detecting if a door has been closed or locked, and informing other devices. Motion sensing being an obvious one. We'll look at a quick scenario for that in just a moment. And lighting, again, being very linked to motion sensors, being linked to those switches. And through these Ruckus IoT Suite technologies, between these low-powered radios and these standards-based technologies, we can get services to talk to each other in an intelligent way. So one very simple example of that, of course, is a motion sensor detects some motion and turns on a light. But what we'll find is that a lot of environments, especially with non-intelligent, non-smart light bulbs, it might be 1 o'clock in the morning or it might be 9 o'clock in the afternoon. They'll always come on at the same brightness level. They'll always come on at the same color temperature. So why not use some of these IoT-enabled technologies, some of these standards-based technologies to actually change both the brightness and the color intensity, the color of those light bulbs to match the time of the day. So instead of the students stumbling in back to their dorms at 1 o'clock from a morning in Cowley Road or a night in Cowley Road and being greeted with bright blue lights, how about we give them that nice warm, soothing color of light instead? Equally so, moving through student rooms over the last couple of months for Wi-Fi services, quite a lot of those rooms end up being very humid. Students not particularly being that keen on airflow, and of course, lack of airflow, an increase in humidity can bring about mold and other undesirable effects on those rooms. So how about we link our humidity sensors to the power controls for vents in the students' rooms? So instead of just the vent turning off after a couple of minutes when the bathroom light has been turned out, how about we use the humidity inside that room to determine when that vent needs to close? Or equally so, if the student has left the room, how about we turn on the vent to give them that airflow throughout the course of the day and improve their experience, improve the rating that they're going to give your college or department for their room in any reviews that they might post. So we get that IoT isn't really the technology that we need to be talking to IT about. It's going to be the site managers. It's going to be the building managers. But what I'd really like to see develop over the next couple of years is a true internet of interconnected things. This very simple proof of concept that I've got here, an e-paper display that might be installed into a room that informs the students how many pieces of gym equipment are currently available, how many laundry room pieces of equipment are currently available for use, their personal pre-shared key for their CloudPath network, or even notices that might be pushed to their room. And these new technologies that are now built into the Ruckus access points, the R550, the R650, and the 750, which are being pushed out now, they've got it already. It's just a case of taking advantage of that technology and finding the appropriate use cases for them inside your environments. So that's all from me for now. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Dave Peters to finish up this morning's session.
Thank you very much, James, and good morning, everybody. If you bear with me just a second while I start my presentation and share my screen. There we go. Excellent. So I'm going to try and keep this brief. I appreciate we're all pressed for time. We're overrunning a little bit. So this is just a little bit about what I've been up to in the last 12 months, helping customers out with remote access. So we're pretty much at our 12-year anniversary. We've had a year of remote working now. This is some of the things we've been doing with Pulse Secure to facilitate secure remote access. So look, Beyond VPN is the title of this. We've all got a VPN. This is nothing new. Typically on demand remote access. There's an agent, you ask to connect, username and password, and away you go. Okay, but there are problems with this for sustained and wider use. So just rolling that out to everybody can present an issue. Number one being unsanctioned computers and unsanctioned endpoints. So, you know, here's our use case. Bob from accounts has got a home PC riddled with malware. Really, we can't be giving him the VPN client and allowing unfettered access back into our corporate network. There is other issues there with, you know, the lack of MFA and the lack of strong identity, ad hoc access, admin only access, very limited user access, all well and good with usernames and passwords. The password is far from dead. It's still commonly used, but if you're going to roll that out on a much wider basis, then it can present an issue without having strong identity. And almost always, pretty much every single deployment I've seen in the last 12 months of the typical on-demand VPN is massively over permissive. You connect, that's it, full layer 3 access to the entire enterprise. Okay, and that especially creates a problem if there's going to be that BYOD, that unsanctioned endpoint. These don't have corporate laptops back out in people's houses. Right at the start of lockdown, I'm certain many of you are running around, going through the junk drawer, trying to find and resurrect as many devices as you possibly could to issue to users so they could work from home. Now, this is typically going to be your back office staff. But it was a real issue at the start of lockdown, and it still is, to be honest. Supply chains are still a bit of a pain in the bum when you need to get new equipment. So what do we do? Using Pulse Secure, it is a very mature remote access gateway, the Pulse Connect Secure. There are many different remote access methods and technologies in there: full fat VPN, software-defined perimeter, zero trust network access, per application VPNs, to tie-ins into mobile device management, all sort of stuff. But one of the key ones was the remote desktop gateway that's built into it, and it's very quick and very easy to set up. So I was speaking with clients. They had 300 staff. They've all gone home. And many of them have their own devices, whether that be laptops, PCs, MacBooks. They can't really validate the security of those endpoints, but they've got a device they can use. How can we get them back into the office? And these users typically have a PC sat on a desk. They're full-time office staff, okay? So what we did, we started with a spreadsheet, and we have a list of usernames and a list of their workstation names that they need to get to. So where the desk that they sit at on a daily basis, straight out of the asset register. Add a little bit of PowerShell. I'm sure James would be impressed with me here. Okay, it's not a script. I'm sorry, James. We add a little bit of PowerShell to create DNS CNAME records. Okay, so we've just created the CNAME for Donald Turnip-PC logs on to workstation3.college.ac.uk. Okay, and we go over to Pulse Secure and we create two really quick resources. Windows Terminal Services and HTML5. The one on the left is for native Windows users. The one on the right is for everybody else. And when I say everybody else, that's everybody with a vaguely modern computer with a browser that supports HTML5. Okay, so a tablet even, a phone, a MacBook, a Chromebook, whatever you like. And what do we get? We get two published links. Looks like that to the user. And I will show you what the user experience looks like. Hopefully, fingers crossed, you can see my screen there. So I've logged into the VPN portal. Let's try the HTML5 first. Based on those variables that were created with a single resource. I'd have to excuse me, I've been fighting this session going stale whilst I was waiting. I would just have to wait for it to pick back up again. It might ask me to log back in again. It might have expired on me. Whistle a tune while we wait. There we go. So that's a browser-based remote desktop session, all tunneled via our VPN gateway, straight through to this is a virtual machine that's sitting inside the office. Okay, and then slightly more feature-rich is the full-fat Windows 1, relies on a small client launcher, launches mstsc.exe, and tunnels the whole thing back through our VPN gateway. So we are talking an hour's worth of configuration, and you've deployed secure remote desktop access to 100% of your users going through to their desktop PCs. Okay, very, very quick, very, very simple. It's great for flexible working. So sometimes they're sat at their desk, sometimes they're working at home. And like I say, it's trivial to deploy that. We've got no layer 3 network connectivity there. It's entirely an RDP tunnel. So using unsanctioned devices, bring your own device becomes far more secure. Now, you didn't see any multi-factor authentication there. So what about that? What if we haven't got any multi-factor authentication? We haven't got the capability to add an Okta or a Duo or an RSA or whatever it may happen to be. Some organizations have. If you don't have one, there's one built in. Simply time-based one-time passwords, TOTP, the open standard, based on those QR codes. Use any authenticator app, Microsoft, Google, Authy, Bitwarden, whatever takes your fancy. Scan the code, you're onboarded with that rolling magic 6-digit number for MFA. That's included at no extra cost within the remote access solution. We've also got some other options about publishing intranet websites. So anything you've got internally that really you don't want to be publishing out to the internet, nor do you want to be giving full layer 3 VPNs just so people can get onto it. So a room booking system, a traditional intranet website based on SharePoint, all of those kind of things, we can rewrite and republish applications straight through the appliance as well. So simple example, Outlook web app. I know nobody in the audience is using on-prem Exchange because you're all in 365, but just an example of pushing through an intranet site and republishing it through the Pulse Connect Secure. Okay. Moving on. What about those that need more? So you need full network layer access or something approaching full network layer access, typically with a domain joined or sanctioned endpoint. So rather than using on-demand VPN, we've been deploying software-defined perimeter, or previously known as always-on VPN before Gartner renamed it for us. Devices may physically leave your network, but they will never logically leave. So what we mean here is that VPN is always permanently connected. If there's an internet connection, that VPN is connected. It's a full tunnel. 100% of the traffic is tunneled back through your data centers. So our example is Bob is a bit of a nightmare. We know he's got some dubious browsing habits, and he's got a corporate laptop. He's sat in the office, he's going through your content filter. You've got a fancy NG firewall blocking all of those common known threats and URL categories and applications that James spoke about earlier. What happens when he leaves the building? Basically, the bit up in the top right happens. There's Bob sat on the internet with little or no filtering. You're relying 100% on whatever endpoint antivirus you've got on there or the limited web filtering. Whereas you've invested in strong perimeter defenses and strong content filtering. So when Bob's sat at home, bring all his traffic through the office. You can allow him through to private resources, and then you can use him on the content filters that you've got on-prem before he accesses the internet. How do we achieve that? A little bit more complicated than that RDP setup, but there's some key components. PKI, certificate authentication. So typically there's a Windows endpoints that are domain joined, can also be done with Mac OS. So we need Active Directory certificate services within the domain, okay? The client is onboarded with the agent and the relevant certificates. So for Windows, it's a computer certificate and a user certificate. That can be done entirely automatically via group policy. As soon as the VPN will start as soon as it sees an internet connection. The variety of ways we create location awareness rules, typically DNS resolution based, but there's other methods as well. So to determine whether you're inside or you're outside. If you're inside the network perimeter, the client will sit dormant. If you're outside the perimeter, client comes to life. If it's pre-user logon, the Windows computer will start a computer context VPN. That context doesn't exist on Mac OS, but in Windows land, the computer can log on with its computer certificate. So it's a full tunnel back to HQ, and this is pre-user logon. So that means group policy is processing in the background, scripts, software distribution, your remote access to the devices, that will work at this point, okay? The user logs on, and it's an interactive log on to the domain, not using cached credentials. So this overcomes that changed password issue for remote users. And this is something that came around 3 to 6 months during lockdown 1.5, lockdown 2, whichever number it was last year. Users have been out for a while now. Oh, he's forgotten his password. Well, of course we can reset it for you. We can't reset it on your laptop because it's a domain device that's outside of our network. Not entirely sure what to do at this point. Whereas with an always-on VPN like that, you change the password, the computer is logged on with its certificate, they log on with a new password that you've issued to them, and everything keeps in sync. Okay, and then you don't go into this very, very rare scenario where you get domain join trusts expire and trust relationships break with endpoints. That's a very rare scenario, but you circumvent all those issues of those machines being remote from the domain for a long period of time. Okay, the user logs in, the VPN transitions over to a user context. User doesn't know that's happened, but from a VPN perspective, the Pulse Connect Secure goes, right, I see. Workstation, laptop 1234 has just disconnected, and user Bob Smith has now connected. And we integrate that typically with next-gen firewalls for user identification in a secure remote access zone, so you've got 100% visibility of that traffic coming from those remote users to your internal network, and then you can control that as you see fit with the firewall policy. And that's pretty much it. So at that point, I'm going to hand back over to Rich.
Thank you very much, Dave. Right, so let me just get all of this ready. So
that was fast enough to keep on track.
I'm gonna just wrap things up now with just 2 quick slides. I just want to circle back to where we started this session at. So, clearly the business of education has changed. We've all got to go and change. We've got to keep up with the changing behaviours and demands of our customers and our students and our teachers. And more importantly, we've got to go and make sure that we secure our financial future. So in order to do that, there's kind of 3 things that we've got to take away from this. So the first one, clearly, we've got to make sure that we provide that fantastic home from home student experience, from the accommodation, travelling all the way across the campus and into the classroom. And number 2 is we've got to make sure that we can ride out any future quarantine restrictions that we might have by providing that ability to both work from home and learn from home. We need to be able to do that anywhere. And also, we've got to go and make sure that we protect our reputation. We've got to protect our integrity, our valuable IP, our personal information, and our financial information. So we've got to go and make sure that we secure those experiences. And so by that, we mean tying together those disparate security systems in order to go and improve that organisational security posture. But, you know, a university is like any business. You need a plan. And the mission has got to be based around delivering this integrated, smart, secure campus experience, which everybody's presented today. But of course, none of this is achieved overnight. It's not a magic silver bullet that we can just go and deploy. So we've really got to go and have some thought behind it. And I think that's where we at ANSecurity can help. And this is the takeaway that I'd like you all to remember, really. Clearly, any transition to a smarter world is going to be a multi-academic year cycle. You know, for any institute, particularly within Oxford. But, you know, if we've not got a vision as to where we want to get to and a plan on how we're going to achieve it, then our chances of succeeding are a little bit more than nil. And we can go and invest a lot of money, which could be wasted in the process. So, you know, what can we do for you? Well, we've had to think about this, and we've put together a really nice shrink-wrapped smart, secure campus planning workshop. You know, we called it the Roadmap for Future Success, which is really what it is. And this is something that, you know, we do on a free of charge basis. If you can go and give us 2 hours of your time, we can either deliver this remotely, or if the conditions allow, we would love to come on site with a bunch of post-it notes and some magic markers and start to have deeper discussions about what the art of the possible is, taking into consideration your specific objectives, assigning a priority, giving a realistic view on what you can achieve for various differing price points, and then starting to map that out onto a realistic time frame, so you start to get this evolving roadmap. And as I said, this roadmap is going to span many academic cycles. So the sort of things that we can cover in these sessions is, first off, we've got to look at that living experience. Clearly so important to the overall student satisfaction level. But we've got to go and think about, you know, what might need to happen for any future enforced quarantine. We've got to give that capability to learn and work from anywhere. And we've got to provide that teaching experience and that learning experience which is fit for that class of 25. You know, we're talking about this Netflix generation. We've got to deliver non-stop access to that on-demand, high-quality content, which we talked about earlier. We need to provide those collaboration tools. And James has really nicely articulated the IoT, Internet of Interconnected Things. You know, there's little point in investing in great technology unless you've got a plan as to how you're going to glue it all together. And it's the gluing it together and doing that securely which is really important. You know, we've got to maintain that reputational integrity, so we've got to make sure that core security infrastructure is embedded and baked into everything that we do. Now, something that we've not touched upon too much today, but it is a key theme, and it's something that we need to go and bake into any future roadmap, is this horrible term, nasty Americanism of monetization. There's got to be something better that we can think of here. But what we're talking about here is how can we go and enable additional revenue streams and maximize the revenue streams that you've got in order to go and help fill that gap. From a technology perspective, that kind of falls into two areas. The first one is how can we go and use technology to really maximize the revenue streams that you had circa 2019. And the second thing is how can you go and look at any technology investments that you might make in the future and try and work out a way of being able to turn that into a lucrative recurring revenue stream for the college. Yeah, there's loads of organisations do this incredibly well, but they do that because they plan it, they think about it, they build business cases, and they work out whether that's the right thing for the organisation to do. And then finally, we've got to have some real future blue sky thinking. Yeah, this has got to continually evolve. You know, we as a partner, our job is to go and scan the landscape in terms of what the vendors offer and provide you with the good advice as to what we think might be something worthy of consideration, and then finding out whether it's the right fit in the right situation at the right time for you. Typically, we will document a session like this. We'll then come back every quarter and sit down and work out, look, you know, the world's changed, your requirements have changed. how do we need to go and move these post-it notes around to be able to go and make sure that you've got that realistic picture for the future. So if this is something you're interested in, then please just reach out to myself, our page at ANSecurity.com, or have a chat with Matt Oldroyd, or talk to James, and we'll happily go and get this booked in for you. So that is the end of the pre-prepared content we've got. I do appreciate that we've gone a little bit over schedule today, so we haven't really unfortunately got any time for any questions. But if you do have questions, if there's anything that we've covered that you'd like a lot more information on, or a little bit more information on, just reach out to any one of us and we would happily go and have a subsequent conversation with you. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much for your time and interest this morning, and we really look forward to having a good 12 months with you as our customers over at Oxford, and we look forward to seeing you face to face over at the Malmaison or somewhere nice like that in the next year. So thank you very much, everybody.